come up with an idea that nobody's ever seen before, but you have an instinct as to how they might use it or why they might value it. And Apple's really a great example because they've had plenty of terrible ideas. Those historically kind of go down, they get kind of buried away.
Mhm.
But they had their Cube, the little toaster
Yeah.
computer. They had the trash can Mac just recently. Back in 2013, I think that thing came out. It was a complete and utter flop. You'd never really know it because they just did a really great job of kind of PRing the next thing that needed to be propped up ahead of it. But that's a company that I think's always been comfortable with putting terrible ideas out there in the interest of pioneering something new, and in the end, ultimately, always driving back to progress, right? Because
Oh,
the
totally.
trash can Mac has led to other innovations, and so I think that's really interesting. One of the pieces I wanted to make sure I brought up and talked about, and I think this fits right in there. It's an idea that you came up with back in the Big Fat Brain days, to try to disrupt a very, very bland space, and that was sort of the B2B technology space. We had a client called Tibco, and they were a purveyor of giant enterprise level technology solutions, and you had come up with an idea that was so counterintuitive to what was happening out in that category or even in the greater B2B space that it was it was insane that we sold that thing through. Tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about Greg the architect.
Well, what's interesting is Greg the Architect actually had its kind of origin story in the Grippo's Masterchip Theater
That's right.
space, which was this very DIY type of aesthetic where you're kind of deconstructing the brand at a certain level and like saying, well, the brand isn't just the taste of the chips, it's kind of the experience with everything. And that experience is real. It's not, we could have spent lots of money having a food photographer come in and make the chips look awesome and do all of that stuff. And we chose to kind of go the other direction because there was a certain reality to the kids who get Christmas presents on Christmas morning playing with the box more than they play with the toy. You know, that there was something really kind of foundational about your relationship with the brand being more than just things about taste. Like the experience could be bigger than just this thing that everybody kind of harps on. And so with the technology space, um, we kind of did the same thing where we kind of deconstructed the whole idea of a software architect's relationship with everybody in the enterprise, with all these vendors who are trying to sell products and stuff like that, and that it was like um, it was basically like all of the stuff that they were seeing right now was being produced by Oracle and being produced by, Larry Ellison's gazillions of dollars and stuff like that. And there was no way that Tibco could compete on that level, but they could compete on what the experience of actually working with people who are helping to customize solutions for you could be. And so this whole idea of customization and of what's really happening to a software architect kind of all molded into this. Well, let's get a bunch of like action figures. And I think we went to like Johnny's Toys or something and bought a bunch of like WWE wrestling like action figures and kind of deconstructed them all and kind of built new characters out of all of this stuff in order to kind of say, well, software architecture is really about taking all of these different components and putting them together in order to provide these like enterprise solutions and stuff like that. And so it was very like, it was almost like a metaphysical thing, but really it was all about like our hands on the screen holding all of these like malformed characters who were parodies and satires of what's going on in a real architect's life and all the real struggles they face rather than, oh, here's a solution that looks really pretty that's going to, make all your wildest dreams come true. And so, it ended up becoming this series where we talked to real software architects and got like real insights about like all of the stuff that they have to do on a daily basis and how screwed up like the entire system is and how chief their COO and their CEO have no idea what's going on and they've just read about something in Wired magazine and they want that to happen and it was just like a almost a horror story. I mean almost like that the end of Toy Story where all of those, toys kind of come out of the ground and it's like a terrible thing. It's like that's every day for a real software architect. And so we really did take that insight and say, well, how can a small company punch above its weight with something that's going to resonate a little bit more with real architects? Plus, there was kind of a nerdy kind of quality to it too that was
Yep.
very like, you know, not trying to take itself too seriously, but at the same time, really talking about the real stuff that software architects deal with. And I think even one of those episodes, I think went and shot it at like a real like user conference or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
where we had this little action figure and kind of like a POV type of thing going through and like asking like these real questions about, rather than just pushing some software, in and using this, shorthand that everybody at a conference hears all the time. It was like this completely different approach to things that really kind of took off more than we thought it would, and ended up being a little bit of a game changer for the way that Tibco talked to people and expressed the benefits of their products and stuff like that. But it was ownable and it was completely different, and it was a total big fat brain thing to do because it was super risky.
Yep.
They didn't have a whole lot of marketing dollars, and we were spending a lot of their marketing dollars on action figures talking on the screen. And the film aesthetic we had was totally DIY, and it was just like, I think we even had like computer monitors with like moving backgrounds projected on them, and then we just held our hands up in front of the monitors, and you could see our hands, you could see like tops of our heads and stuff like that. It was just so transparent, but I think that's what kind of cut through a
Yep.
little bit.
Yeah.
That was a frequency in the noise that people could actually hear above
Well, I
everything
just don't
else.
think people, like you had said, the slickness of what IBM or Oracle or SAP or anybody was doing and are still doing now was the white noise. It was certainly a very safe place to play, and surely it's that technology industry has a lot of, as many do, right? You've got a lot of people that are moving from one company to the next. They're carrying that sort of equity with them. They think that, there's a way that this technology needs to look. And so a lot of them get off, very talented CMOs and others get sort of off course of who they're really selling to. They're selling to human beings. They're connecting with people. That's who's buying the $5 million ERP solution that's going to get installed. It's a person. It's a person who has a family at home that is relying on them having a job, and these are people with human feelings and needs and ambitions. And so what you're saying about the hands being in the shot, there was certainly something really just palpably human about that, accessible, that made you think whoever's on the other end of this line is not some anonymous white paper, email gate kind of thing. Like I suspect I'm going to have a far more meaningful connection with Tibco in that case, and they did actually, because that's really how Tibco was operating at the time. I think they were playing, they were a challenger, and they were playing like a challenger. But your idea, I think, was it was a terrible idea.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, I mean, I that was one of those times when I was like had major flop sweat going to pitch that idea, because at the time, we didn't. This was early on in Big Fat Brain.
Scraping together enough money to
Just,
buy
I mean,
plane tickets to get to these pitch
yeah,
meetings.
sleeping under our desks at work, just trying to get through I mean, I can't believe how many lines of code you probably wrote in those first couple of years just to
Just
try
trying to
to
make
get it.
shit stuff.
Uh,
Bleep.
but yeah, but I mean, those risky things were, I think we had this idea that we were going to do the thing other people weren't going to do
Mm-hmm.
in everything.
Yeah.
I mean, in our choice of locations of where we put our office, in our aesthetic of going to, like, when we started getting nominated for awards and stuff like that, we even went to the award shows in a completely different way.
Right. Yeah.
Kept showing up unexpectedly.
Yeah.
And I think that was kind of where we got people like our good friend Rob Barnett to kind of, just take a chance, I mean, help us defer some of that risk by, just going along with us. And we had definitely had missteps along the way, and definitely had meetings where we went in with, I think we went to like a Wells Fargo meeting. Remember that?
Yep.
Where it was like this completely off the rails, different. They had never seen a meeting like that ever in their
Yeah.
lives. I guarantee it. And
The meeting
it
that
was,
Matt's talking about is we sent a we were in an RFP, so we were, excuse me, we were sort of in a formal process to be, evaluated as an agency, and we were going up against some pretty big guns, and we put together a sort of an interactive pre-sell thing that we sent to them. It started with a video that talked about how Big Fat Brain would personalize, is about a personalized experience, personalized like you need for your consumers, personalized like you want for your relationship with your agency. And so we let them personalize our pitch meeting. And we sent them to a microsite that basically allowed them to pick every element, like who's going to come and pitch to you. And so we lined up, some of our, some of the employees of Big Fat Brain, and they were, they could pick who was going to come. They could pick how they were going to be dressed. They could pick what sort of refreshments were going to be there. How long was the presentation? Did they want us to start from the beginning or the end? It was just really interesting, and they all responded. We had like 9 or 10 of these decision makers kind of check back in with us, but that was interesting. Like, why would you do that? Why would you slip out of the conformity of the RFP process? We didn't win, so maybe that was a terrible idea to do that.
but knowing where Wells Fargo ended up, maybe we dodged a little bit of a bullet there. Although maybe we could have steered them away from, creating fake accounts in order to,
Well, now that they're one of my clients, Matt, I'm sure there are great times ahead for Wells Fargo. Yeah, that's one of the things. That's one of the reasons that doing Imagivate Live is kind of a terrible idea, because at some point I'm going to step in it big time with
totally.
with a current client or a prospect or something like that. So that's just what happens on Imagivate, right? We just do.
Yeah.
We make terrible decisions and we just go for it. I guess. Hey, we got a new follower. Tom Thousand Las Pasas. Nah, I missed it. Dang it. Welcome, Tom Thousand Las Pasios. Tom Thousand Las Pasios. I don't.
Is that Portuguese?
I don't know. I don't know, but it's exciting. Wait, my new follower alert went off for the very first time, because now we have 17 followers. We're working really hard, folks, by the way, to try to get to 50 followers on Twitch. That will make Imagivate an affiliate. So tell all your friends, because all we really need to do is just have people blindly follow this channel as much as we possibly can. So terrible ideas and lots of risk. Matt wasn't whistling Dixie when he said that we were on the border of bankrupting the company almost every month, because we were in our growth period, when we were trying to just kind of build some notoriety, build a portfolio, as many young companies might do, like kind of leaning into opportunities. But we were just having a warm lead. Like, we might have interacted with somebody online and gotten them to email back and forth with us a couple of times. We would book a flight to wherever they were and set up like, hey, you know what? I just happened to be in San Francisco next week. What, you want to grab some coffee and just meet in person? And we did that probably a dozen times, where we would be like, I have to buy a $1,300 plane ticket because I have coffee with this guy who, otherwise, we may never even interact again. And we try to stack up as many little meetings as we could when we would go into those towns. But man, they almost always paid off, didn't they? Because we kind of went into an opportunity like that just full bore. And and the reason why I'm establishing that context is to say, if if you think about where we were and how dire, in some cases, in some points in time, how dire it was with us financially, that we would make an investment like that, and not only make an investment like that, but double down on that investment with a risky proposition, right? We weren't going and trying to tell them that we were just like any other agency because we needed to play it safe because we were making that big investment in that
Oh
plane
yeah.
ticket or the hotel room, right? We were taking our most terrible idea forward because we wanted to present ourselves as the other option, the people who thought the different way, and it paid off a lot. Um,
Totally.
do you have any do you have any favorite memories of kind of you mentioned the Wells Fargo thing, but any others where we kind of showed up and shattered expectations for what it was going to be like meeting an agency from Kentucky? Although I don't know what expectations anybody might have had at any point with an agency from Kentucky coming to meet with them, but any good stories of really slinging it out there?
Yeah, I mean, I remember like I remember a lot of clients who were so if you go back to kind of one of the most important moments in Big Fat Brain history, it had to be um, working on the Thank You for Arguing book with
Yep.
Jay. What was his name? I can't remember his name.
J. Tom Thousands Last Bus.
That was it.
Yeah, no,
And
but this is still, folks, a bestseller every year. It's like on the New
yeah,
York Times bestseller list because this guy figured out an amazing magic code of some sort.
yeah. Well, not only an amazing magic code for how to kind of get into rhetoric and arguing your point, but using really awesome examples to communicate how to do it throughout this book or whatever. So anyway, he kind of, I can't even remember how we made contact with him, but he was like, I like your vibe. I want to do something completely different. And so we ended up doing like a really like interesting web experience for him that kind of worked really well with that book. And as it turned out, he was also um, writing for one of the in-flight magazines,
Yep.
and those in-flight magazines are like, you've got a captive audience, and you got somebody who's sitting in a plane for 3 hours, they got nothing to do. This was like even pre-iPhone and everything, so you're gonna read the in-flight magazine, and so like literally millions of people were reading these magazines, and he had such a great experience with us that he wanted to kind of do a feature
Yep.
on us. And it really did get at the core of what he was talking about, which was arguing your case is really about getting into these insights rather than just quoting facts and stuff like that. There are these ways to really kind of change people's minds or get them to think about something differently. And he, in his interview process with us, we were pitching him all of these, oh, you wouldn't believe what we did with this client, or we went to the Webbies one year and we weren't even like, we didn't even win anything. We were just nominated, but we went anyway on our own dime and met a bunch of people and stuff. And so he was just kind of fascinated that there were like advertising agencies, even though I don't know that that necessarily described what we did, but that there were people out there who were thinking as differently about a subject like this as he was kind of proposing in his book. You need to think differently about how you interact with people and how you communicate and how you argue with them. And so it was just kind of this interesting kind of coalescence of his philosophy and our philosophy. So he wrote this article and put it into, I can't even remember the name of the magazine. It wasn't Sky.
No, but it was like
Southwest magazine?
yeah, it was the Southwest Airlines magazine.
Yeah. And anyway, he we didn't really think much of it. We didn't really even think about the numbers or anything like that. But you've got a lot of business travelers, a lot of people who are looking for something different. And this is 2006 probably.
Mm-hmm.
When the economy's doing really well and people maybe have some extra money to throw around on different ideas and stuff like that. And anyway, we actually had to hire people almost immediately just to like answer the phone because so many people were calling, having read this article about different ways of thinking. And
Yep.
so that kind of validated a lot of what we did, but also at the same time, you had these people kind of coming to the game with a little bit different perspective and just kind of dipping their toes into what different actually looks like. And so I just remember like picking clients up at the airport instead of flying out to meet them.
Yeah.
I remember
Yeah.
like
Irv
Irv
Shapiro.
Shapiro.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, going and picking him. I mean, my Jeep didn't have like floorboards. Like you could actually like see through the bottom of my Jeep onto the highway,
Yeah.
and going and picking up this guy who thought he was going to have like a black Crown Vic come and pick him up or something, and it's no, it's me, and driving him to our, you know, our our house of detritus in Covington, Kentucky, and
Yep.
stuff like that. And immediately, everything about us was completely different than what he expected.
Yeah.
And for some people, that was jarring, and it was like, I'll give you guys a shot, but I'm not really sure. And for other people, it was like, I'm all in. Let's see what we can do. Let's see how we can bust things up. And so, I think there really was that shift where we were going out and scraping everything that we could to get a plane ticket together to just go have coffee with somebody, to all of a sudden having this like-minded person kind of promote us in this really interesting way to a lot of people, where they started kind of coming to us saying that's different, and right now I could use a little bit of different.
Yep.
And that's what got us hooked up with our good friend Rob Barnett, and a lot of other great partners and friends, that employees. It all kind of took off from there. That everybody was kind of bought in to
Yep.
the idea of terrible ideas are potentially what a good place to start on where to go next, because the world's changing. You can't keep doing the same things over again. You can't keep treading water. And kind of these terrible ideas, these ideas that 3 years prior to that would have been unthinkable, kind of became a basis for conversations that became very very productive
Yep.
for all parties involved.
Hey, Chad, for those of you who are still hanging around, anybody have a question for Matt about terrible ideas, about his experience? Matt, what about as people are maybe queuing up some questions? What are some good examples of when you didn't do a terrible idea? I talked at the beginning of the show about the question of what's worse, a terrible idea that dies or a mediocre idea that lives. What are some mediocre ideas that you've floated out there, and what's your experience been with that kind of work?
Well, I mean, before I came to Big Fat Brain, I didn't really have a whole lot of digital experience. So a lot of my experience was in radio and TV and print and stuff like that. And that's actually how we met. Was I cast you to do some voiceover work on
Chili, right? Chili commercials?
no, I think the first thing that we did was like that Indiana beach or whatever.
The water park kind of.
It was a water park in Indiana or something
Oh,
like
that's
that.
right. Oh my
And
gosh.
you came in to do the VO, and I had written mediocre ideas about, okay, here are all the boxes to check when it comes to promoting a water park, and we know this because we've been doing it for decades. So we know what works. We got a certain amount of tickets we need to sell, and season tickets and stuff like that. So just do, what gets people in the door. Just do enough. And when you came in, there was this script that I gave you, and we're like, okay, run through the script, and you did it, and it was brilliant. But then you said, what if we did this? And then you started ad-libbing some
What
stuff.
an
And
asshole.
well,
What kind of talent does
just,
that?
the client wasn't even there, so it was kind of a safe space to just kind of had fun. And I really just totally dug your vibe, because it was a lot the way that I think. And what you were doing was kind of like almost making fun of this script that I had written, which otherwise, had I been a little bit older or a little bit more of a creative director at the time, I probably would have been like, either embarrassed or upset that you're, slamming my copy or whatever. But it was such a brilliant turn that you made on just a couple of those things, or just a couple of ads that you put in there, that really were kind of that human type of thing, that was kind of like, yeah, people are just going to hear this as white noise in the background, and maybe some of them will be inspired to say, "Oh yeah, that reminds me, I've got to get season tickets again." But some of the stuff that you put in there that actually ended up in a couple of the spots was very much just pushing it towards just a little bit different flavor for that thing. And
Mm-hmm.
it was a terrible idea because at the time I was working for an agency that was just like everything that we had was just very like just keep it running, just keep
Mm-hmm.
the machine running, just keep the ideas in that space. I had bank clients and chili clients and stuff that were all very much like there is a algorithm to TV, radio, and print, and we're not going to stray from that because it's, I mean, this is the era of direct marketing,
Right.
where it's
Yep.
like just spray and pray, get your 2% response rate, and that's all you need, and that's all anybody really expects.
Yep.
And so I had come from that background where you weren't necessarily being rewarded for trying to break what didn't seem like didn't didn't seem like it needed any kind of deconstruction or any type of new thinking. And
It's interesting you say that. There's a question that I think that maybe just can kind of be appended to what you're saying. Lose the Tude asks if you have thoughts on data and insight as it relates to terrible ideas. I feel like data and insight can get lazy and lead to really mediocre ideas. Not too dissimilar from what you're talking about, right? Which
totally,
is like there's
yeah.
a formula to what's going on. Can you maybe talk a little bit more to the today's 2020 crash of data driven creativity, insights to get to
Yeah.
solutions? And I think that, the way that Lose the Tude kind of paid off the question is, when it comes down to that one-to-one problem to solution stuff, is that an enemy of terrible, as it were?
Yeah, it is because I think even the ways that we gather data now are fit into an algorithm. That like if you were to get to different data, you'd have to think about a different way to collect that data, or even a different way to think about what it is that you actually want to collect. Because at the time, when I was doing like TV and radio and stuff like that, it was a very binary data system. It was like this either sells or it doesn't. That was
Mm-hmm.
it. There wasn't a whole lot of opportunity to collect. I mean, you had your Nielsen stuff and you had, things that you could do with direct mailers and stuff like that, put different phone numbers on them to find out, whether people were responding to this type of thing or this type of thing. And it was today you've got like real-time data on
Mm-hmm.
stuff, which gives you a lot more inputs and potential for a lot more insights. But unfortunately, when you have an algorithm running in the background, sometimes you just kind of let the algorithm do a lot of the work,
Yep.
and you just take what you're given and say okay. Or even in some cases, you you create ads on the fly using that algorithm where there's not even necessarily a human being involved. And that can definitely optimize those assets that you're putting out there and can have a great impact for your client when there's constant optimization of headlines and images and stuff like that that are tapping into something that only the data can really kind of uncover.
Yep.
And it's happening in such real time that it's almost like you don't even have time to stop and say, well, is this actually right for the brand, or is this actually right for the experience of somebody online clicking on something, if it's just about optimizing in tenths of a percent, or whatever that is. And data science, I think, is one of those areas where there's going to be people who are going to have terrible ideas in data science that are going to be foundational in what's next for data science, because it's not just about algorithms, and there's still a very human component to thinking about what's right
Yep.
and thinking about what's next and thinking about how to use data not just to optimize an online thing in real time, but to really kind of start uncovering interesting stuff that can be foundational for All right, well, let's think about the opposite of what we've been doing. What would the
Mm-hmm.
data give us if we
Right.
were to throw this monkey wrench into it?
Yeah.
You still have to have monkeys throwing wrenches, and that's kind of what we are. Is monkeys throwing
Wrench
wrenches?
throwing monkeys.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's actually a really great point because everything in programmatic media now, data driven creative determination that's happening with these algorithms is typically gamed to be incremental and to be, you know, positive, right? That we and everything becomes so commoditized in that system that there is no longer a need in many cases for higher flying creative ideas when you are down at a place where you're saying, did the blue background or the red background perform better, right? And I believe that I've always kind of been postulating that the AI apocalypse isn't going to be because computers suddenly became infinitely wise and smart and asked giant universal questions and then decided to decimate humanity because it didn't fit in this giant plan. I think it's going to be that AI was just a little less stupid than people, and that's where we've built a system that's super smart at doing really dumb things, and so it's an interesting postulation. Like, what happens if you reprogram the algorithm to experiment with terrible ideas, right? What if
Yeah.
because you're right that you need that human intervention to come in and throw the wrench, but if there is nobody there to throw the wrench because everybody's satisfied with their 4% increase in performance over a certain period of time, maybe we'll need to rely on the computers to do that for us. I don't know, but that's a great question, Lose the Toot. I do think that
Yeah.
there's real tension right now. Real tension. I mean, I personally, it's kind of. I've written a few manifestos about it. I think we're giving up the ghost on actual creativity in the interest of serving the numbers, and I just feel like the further and further we let it get out of our hands, the harder and harder it's going to be to pull it back in.
Yeah, I remember like the first time I really kind of understood this was can't remember. I think it was probably a Brian McDonald and Craig type of discussion,
Yeah.
that we were having around the difference between the top 10 ways to succeed this summer or something, a headline like
Yep.
that was going something and tweaking it to 11 ways to not completely screw up your summer.
Right.
I mean, it was
Yeah.
just like the almost like Noam Chomsky like grammar type of syntax thing that
Yeah.
was somehow tapping into this insight that people, you know, don't believe it when you say there's a top 10 list because that's just, but if there's 11 things, well, I believe that because that means there are only 11 and they
Right.
are, they're vetted, they have vetted this down to, 11 things as opposed to just some random 10 things. And I don't want to screw up my summer.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where you get to like a lot of these Facebook ads that you see right now that are kind of like, doctors say, don't, throw out this one vegetable or whatever,
Right.
and in some of the ads it's like an avocado, and in other ads it's like you don't even know what it is,
Right. It doesn't
but it's
matter.
it's like tapping into these insights, but it's they're not exactly sure what the insight is. And so again, it's about optimization of 4% or whatever. But if you were to write the algorithm to do something that would get people to completely freak out, then it's about the risk of having nobody clicking on it or
Mm-hmm.
having 60% more people clicking on it. But I don't know that the AI is smart enough to figure out what freak out mode looks like,
Mm-hmm.
what a terrible idea actually looks like, because it's
Yep.
never been programmed to think about a terrible
Right.
idea.
That's true, and that's
But
God. That could be really interesting.
you and I can sit here and we can talk to everybody in the chat about what a terrible idea is, because in the abstract only we can kind of think about, we can break our own programming
Yep.
to say what's a terrible idea look like and kind of untether ourselves from our own algorithm. This sounds like really metaphysical and I'm sorry for this, um but we can still do that. I don't know. I'm not a I'm not a programmer. I would not have any idea how to program an algorithm to create terrible ideas
Mm-hmm.
as a way of getting in completely new sets of data where 1 in 10 of those ideas out there explodes as opposed to incrementally optimizes,
Mm. Yep. It's
but
interesting that you
that's
say 1 out of 10 because Lose the Tude's follow up is we've been pushing our clients on the concept of quote unquote counterintuitive insights, those 10% of insights that cause our brains to perform a perfect 180 flip, pointing to a
yeah,
new and compelling space that's rooted in truth. I think that's great. I mean, and I think where you were headed with it, Matt, is like, man, if you could figure out how to, because think about it, if you could have a computer, some machine learning system that's just gathering tons and tons and tons and tons of data, and then you could do thousands of permutations of terrible ideas. I mean,
yeah.
the question is that predictable in any way in how it would perform? And what's the sort of level of investment you need to make on, because I think the other thing that this data driven era has demonstrated to us is that you never bank on one thing, and that's why a
Oh
lot of
no,
these kind of above the line creative agencies with still trying to sell like the big tagline,
right, right.
it feels so out of touch with how we know that the the potential of a truly personalized digital ecosystem can be. But in order to get a terrible idea out there, I don't think you can make one terrible idea, just like you can't make one great idea anymore.
Yeah,
You got to make
you need
lots
to
and lots of terrible ideas, right?
diversify your terrible portfolio for sure, across a bunch of different platforms and interactions and stuff like that. And the data is built right now for the optimization. And you're right, I wouldn't know exactly where to start. I wouldn't know how to go in and pitch that to a client right now, that what you've got, which is good enough, isn't as good as it could be because we're not putting enough terrible ideas out there.
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean, even when Imagivate started, this idea you and I talked about, well, what's a bad idea? And it was almost like, well, we're not talking about bad ideas.
Right.
A bad idea is like,
Missed the brief, right?
or The Last Jedi is a bad idea, you know, but cats is a terrible idea. And because it's so terrible, so many people are drawn to just how terrible it is.
Yep.
It takes on a life of its own, you
Yes.
know?
God,
And
that's a
so,
great example.
yeah. And so Last Jedi was just checking the boxes or, whatever. And I don't mean to,
Yeah. Don't get me
you know,
started on Last Jedi.
yeah,
Poof.
I don't want to get off track, but it's checking boxes. It made $1 billion. It did what it was supposed to do,
Yep.
Whereas Cats kind of changed the conversation about what's wrong with Hollywood. Whereas Last Jedi wasn't really, it was nipping at the heels of that idea, but it wasn't enough of a complete disaster for people to do that 180 turn,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And so nobody's ever going to do that again. Well, somebody will do that again, but
Do you think cats just let's just finish that out, because is that a happy accident, or so the way I would expand on what you were saying is cats is
yeah.
a terrible idea because they took some chances with that, right? Like they
Oh,
weren't sure
yeah,
what it was
right.
going to look like to anthropomorphize, and do some of the CG stuff. And so
And at a certain point, there was no turning back, I'm sure.
right. But so you can argue that they were not playing it safe exactly. Now, in another way, you could argue that they were, because they stacked it
Yeah,
with
that's true.
celebrities, right? And so, but it's really interesting to me because I really love that you use that as this sort of anecdote, because it is terrible, and what it did was it created so much like contention in conversation. Like you said, it changed the conversation, and people had opinions about it, and people mostly had opinions about how terrible it was and arguing about how terrible it was. I don't think there were a lot of people probably clamoring for how good they thought it was, and yet I bet a lot of people still watched it, were curious, were interested, and maybe it was a financial flop. I don't really know. I didn't follow it, but what makes that different? from how
Yeah.
terrible Last Jedi was, right? And bad, I guess, is if we want to kind of distinguish them.
Yeah,
Um,
and maybe from a terrible idea perspective, Cats was just a very, very, very bad idea. I am a big fan of David Lynch,
mm-hmm.
and I think in terms of the way he operates in Hollywood, he just has terrible ideas. He
Yep.
has ideas that only certain people will go and see,
Yep.
and but from an artistic standpoint, it's visionary stuff. With all the talk about Dune coming out, I think I told you I went and watched the 5 hour version, the uncut version of
Yep.
David Lynch's Dune,
Yep.
and it's freaking amazing. I mean, just the vision he has for it and everything, but financial failure and just a terrible idea to try to turn that particular book into a movie in 1980 or whenever he did it, 1985. Just a terrible idea, but so interesting and so foundational for a lot of the stuff that came afterwards. And I think that kind of like most seminal ideas are terrible ideas,
Yeah.
or they at least had a forebear that
Yeah. Right.
was
In their
that was
DNA.
just a
Right.
terrible idea that somebody tweaked or somebody at least pushed off from to get to where they were. You're talking about Apple before, and I remember somebody had a Newton, and I remember looking at that thing when it first came out, what what is this,
Yeah.
why would I mean, it just seemed like so out of place and so ahead of its time, but you couldn't really look at it and say, oh wow, this is really ahead of its time. You just kind of looked at it and went, why?
Yeah.
I can't imagine, why can't I just type something in? Why do I have to write it and have it convert it to text for me, or whatever? It was just like your mind wasn't there yet.
Yeah.
But now, what is it,
Yeah.
25 years,
It's
30
mind
years
blowing
later,
when you think about it. Yeah.
it's just like, how did they know
Yeah.
that this would become our lives or our world? And I'm sure, the Newton idea, which was this terrible idea, just kept festering at, one infinity loop place or whatever it was, you know, and eventually just kind of came back up almost on a subconscious level of driving forward and always having progress in mind and willing to take chances, willing to put something out there and let your marketing team pick up the pieces or whatever, like you said
Yep.
about the trash can. There's something really interesting that I don't know that they had any data to suggest that people were going to do this. They did it because they could,
Right.
and nobody was telling them they couldn't. And that used to
Yeah.
be,
That's
if you
R and D,
remember,
right?
that
That's
that
the
was the
old way
that was
of
the
R and
big
D, right?
fat brain. That was the big fat brain. Like, anytime anybody asked us, how did you come up with that idea? Or how did you, it was always, nobody told us that we couldn't.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
And we said that to everybody in
I miss
interviews
those
and
days.
everything.
Um, well, we're getting close to the end of our time. I want to just thank the folks that stuck around in chat. By the way, the name that I couldn't say before, Matt, is Tom 1001 A Space Boltonry. And he has laid claim to it being, well, he said it's a bad name. Tom, that is a terrible username. But well,
Isn't there a character limit for these usernames?
Apparently not, and it blew past my template on my little thank you. But it was really great because when it came across the banner, I'm sure he was excited to see that every one of those characters was accounted for in my giant screen wide banner. He was commenting on The Room. Was so bad they made a good movie about the bad making of the bad movie, right? That's
the Tommy Wiseau movie. That's a perfect example. Yeah, they even made a movie about the movie.
Yeah,
and
right.
it was nominated for an Academy Award, and it was terrible idea, terrible execution, terrible across the board, but in such an interesting way that it completely changed like the way people value risk in film. You put somebody who has no acting ability in this lead role and shoot it with a bunch of his friends on a potato, and just that whole thing was just, it all came together brilliantly for that movie. And it kind of like a Rocky Horror type of thing, where it becomes foundational in our culture now. You can mention that and everybody's got an experience with the first time they saw it or the 11th time they saw it or whatever it is. And it was absolutely sincere.
Yep.
he was making that movie with all sincerity, and you really have to applaud that level of terribleness
Indeed.
when it comes to that kind of stuff. Yeah, great point, Tom.
It's a good example. Tom, thanks for jumping in and joining us. Lose the Tude and Shepherd Josh, Dave, M Squirrel, everybody that came along for the ride today. Thank you so much. Matt, thank you. Thanks for being the first guest. Thanks again for being a big part of Imagivate even happening in the first place. You've been with me since really the beginning and helping me kind of figure out what this needs to look like and how it needs to come to life. And so couldn't have done it without you. And I miss the big fat brain days. I know that we've grown into different human beings than we were back then. But man, there were so many good lessons learned and so many really great memories that we kind of built together there. And I hope that you'll come back and do this with us again. I feel like this is only the beginning of our conversation around terrible ideas. Any final words of wisdom for folks before we sign off?
No, I just think that this is such a great format, especially early in the morning. I know this has got a little bit further into the day, and Troy, you've got a split, but just such a great way to start your day, kind of reformatting your brain a little bit. I think it takes you in a different direction for the rest of your day, that first thing that you do or think about in the morning. And so if you can kind of break your thinking a little bit and really embrace a terrible idea in the morning, I think it can have a big impact on the rest of their day. So I'm proud to have been, part of this. It's been a long trip these past 11 days, Troy. I know Imagivate took a lot of time and energy to get off the ground, but I'm really excited for it. I think getting more people involved like you have in the last couple of days has just been so exciting to see a lot of participation and a lot of people get it.
Yeah, and that's one thing we did learn yesterday for sure is that this only succeeds when there's people participating in here, and when they did yesterday and when we did today, you can see how much fun this is going to be and how much we can learn together. So
yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Matt. Thanks to everybody. And we will see you Monday morning at 8:30. Have a great weekend.